Final session. Um, so I'll introduce Rachel Helps and Stephen Peck, who will be doing a joint presentation this afternoon. Rachel Helps is the Wikipedian in residence. There's a new term for you, it was for me, at the BYU Library, and a graduate student in BYU's English department studying Mormon literature. Stephen Peck is an evolutionary ecologist and fellow of the Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship and has published on ecology, religion, and philosophy academically. He is also a novelist, essayist. The Aesthetic Universe, Evolution, Embodiment, and Suffering.
Thank you. It is so good to be here, and after all these presentations, I almost feel like I need to rewrite the entire talk, but I will leave that to you. So we're excited to be here. I want to give you a sort of an introduction to where we're going, and this truly is a joint presentation in the sense that we may argue, we may debate, we may disagree. This isn't a planned, worked out play. It's a genuine, emergent event, hopefully.
It's more like a jazz composition. We have the basics here.
Yeah, we have the basics, and we are ready to play, so sit back and enjoy. So here's the elevator pitch to give you some context. Most current Christian theologies have their roots in a cosmology that is deterministic and machine-like. Think of Newton and the deists. Well, our question is what happens if we update our theologies, especially Mormon theology, in light of current cosmologies informed by science and aesthetics. There's been a lot of work done in these two areas that actually may have bearing on our theologies, especially in the biological evolutionary sciences, physics, mathematics, the natural origin of aesthetics, and these are our primary explorations.
So if this is the book of life that theology's been based on, it's kind of old-fashioned. We want to update it with a new book of life that we read as canon. And we don't want to just limit ourselves to science of the Enlightenment. We want to go and say, what are the theological implications of current science, that kind of stuff.
Yes, so what we want to do is begin with our assumptions. These are loose assumptions. They're more the things that have informed us and informed our thought. So,
if you disagree with these, we're like, I'm sorry, we were assuming that.
yeah.
So one thing we're assuming is process theology. You got a bird making a nest here. It's this idea that God is taking care of us like children, and he's trying to lure us to do good.
Organic evolution is the context for everything we're about to say. So I've worked pretty hard trying to think about how evolution informs theology. I wrote a book called Science, the Key to Theology, bouncing it off of Pratt's Science, the Key of Theology.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, you're just reusing all your ideas from this book and our presentation. And Steve was like, don't worry, Rachel, they won't have read it. Another one of our assumptions is that we're working in an open universe where our decisions actually matter and it's not just all determined.
And this is a fairly radical open universe too. Not exactly borrowing from open theology in the sense that we're saying things started ex nihilo, but in fact,
no.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No. That's a part of it. So we fit okay into process theology, but it's a contingent one with nuances that need to happen.
And our last assumption is that gods are enmattered and embodied, like this Ernst painting of very sensual god and goddess.
So yeah, that's.
And so we're organizing this in these three orbs. Orbis primus, orbis secundus, and orbis tertius. So we're using Latin so that we sound like we know what we're talking about, just like in last night's keynote. This organization comes from a book that Steve recently discovered and loved called The Indispensable Excess of the Aesthetic, Evolution, and Sensibility in Nature by Katja Mandoki. And we'll progress from Orbis primus is like the material, mechanical world. Orbis secundus is living life. And then the last one is how those living things interact with one another. So that's kind of the overall organization. And rather than starting with like the question of evil, we're trying to like start with science. Would you say that's about how we organize it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to be upfront, when we get to the problem of evil, we're on board with evil. This is our fundamental assumption.
We're on board with evil.
We're on board with evil. Give in to your evil nature. No. But we do assume that it is a fundamental, as Taylor talked about, constituent of the universe. Our fundamental assumption is that both God and suffering, both an embodied God and suffering, are givens in the universe.
Okay, we're gonna get there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So can we?
getting ahead.
Let's start out with we picked some poetry for each of these three things to sort of act as an epigraph. And for this first one, we decided to indulge ourselves and use some of Steve's poetry. This comes from Gilda Trillam, and Gilda Trillam actually wrote this poem about her version of My Turn on Earth, which is an LDS work. And the machinist in this poem is Satan. This is good to know, to understand it. The machinist shouts, "Where all is arranged from the beginning, and once in motion it starts to spin, all ends are determined from what beginning laid." The other looks upward. Is there hope in him? While the bringer with tinker toys played and stacked, another looked at heaven's ecologies, at life manifold, diverse within spheres, turning, emerging, knots in knots folding, living block universe where everything is determined because you know what the velocity was of the first ping pong ball. We're kind of rejecting this block universe idea. And do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so this has its roots in both Augustine and Einstein. It's the idea that from some God's eye view, you can see the entire universe. What happens, though, with that is that's a kind of cheap creationism. And I don't think that when people like Einstein who didn't believe in God talk about that, they don't realize that if you can see everything from the beginning, everything is determined. There is no free play.
It's like a YouTube video that you can scrobble through at any time. You
Right.
can go backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I call it the Gilligan's Island because if the block universe is true, God is stuck in a loop of the video game, video tape of whatever has happened.
Oh, right.
Continues to happen.
We did the video here of Steve going backwards and forwards, pouring water.
There's me, and that's the truth of the block universe is that any equation, any physical equation that defines processes in the universe, whether you play it forwards or backwards, is irrelevant in the block universe. One of this is a guy walking his dog. And whether you read from the bottom to the top or top to the bottom, it's the same in the block universe. There is no priority in the arrow of time, which we're going to argue against.
We don't want to live in that universe.
No.
Oh, wait, okay. Yeah, that's
Can't
that's
get out
horrifying.
Of this one. This loop is stuck forever and ever.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So my conception of science was like, wouldn't if you're a scientist, then you have to reduce it to all of this stuff. But Steve told me that's not true. There's a whole book called Beyond Mechanism. Science is trying to get past this epistemological materialism and move on to an ontological one.
Well,
or is it the other way around? I'm actually confused.
What it's getting at is that there is more than mechanism in the universe. So this is not necessarily a religious claim. It's actually what we're seeing in biology is that reductionism completely fails. We study it in science because we have to. That's all science is good at. But in reality, there is so much going on, so much free play, all this kind of thing is going on that...
So you're giving up on science?
No, I'm giving up on reductionism. Science is for reductive
But, I mean,
things.
don't you have to reduce things to something to say
To
science?
do science, yeah, you do. But
But
will that give
you're
us
saying
all...
you can have both?
I'm saying that you can't use science for some things. And we're reaching kind of the limits of that when we start thinking about,
Oh, so we need to go beyond epistemological materialism, is what you're saying.
Yes,
That's-
materialism.
We're going to stare into the void.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're really good at staring into the void.
Okay. What was this slide going to be about? Oh, rather than the block universe, we believe that creation's ongoing.
Ongoing and radically. And what that means is God is creating, the universe with God are interested in novelty, in the creation of diversity. All of this is a unfolding of what's new. When I look out, I was just listening to some finches outside in the trees. All of this evolved, and I mean that quite literally, evolved from very simple, organized organisms and things. And what we see is this radical diversity emerges from the universe. There is nothing necessary about a giraffe, and yet we have them. And in fact, if you read Job, the one thing Job is complaining, has a trial for God because he suffered and he shouldn't have. The vending machine should have worked and he should have been blessed. But rather than that, God just shows up and says, wow, have you seen my whales? Have you seen my hippos and crocodiles?
Oh,
They're
right.
amazing.
Yeah, Job's like, why isn't it working? I'm being so righteous. Why aren't you blessing me?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And God's like, he just ignores the
It
question.
just ignores the
So
question and says, what about out here?
Rude.
Look at this. Amazing. And I think that's God's aim in a sense. Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
Okay, so
that's a
that
book I wrote.
provides a great segue into the Orbis Secundus life. We have an epigraph for this. Would you like to read it?
Yes. So this is Orbis Primus is actually essentially the assumptions of all modernity, that everything is determined and fixed. The Laplace's demon, if you could know the momentum and position of every single thing in the universe, then you can predict forward and backward onto forever. And I think this fails in light of modern science is where we're seeing this failed. And so life, this is X.J. Kennedy's poem, Nothing in Heaven Functions as It Ought. Nothing in heaven functions as it ought. Peter's bifocals blindly set on crack. His gates lurch, ride with the cackle of a cock. Not turn with the hush of gold as Milton had thought. Gangs of slaughtered innocents keep huffing the nimbus off of the venerable bead, like that of an old dandelion gone to seed, and the beatific choir keeps breaking up coughing. But hell, sleek hell, hath no freewheeling part. None takes his own sweet time, none quickens pace. Ask anyone, how come you're here, poor heart? Click, a tear will start, imprinted with the abstract of his case. So, I didn't write it.
So this sort of gives you this sense of like, we see this vending machine god as representing hell and Satan, and we don't like that at all.
Yeah, the determinist,
It's boring.
determinist universe, in fact, well, we'll get to this. It'll destroy agents.
No. Okay, so we want to talk about natural selection and how it interacts with sexual selection. This is a skull of an Irish elk, and it actually made these giant antlers that were so beautiful that it couldn't survive anymore. That's why we don't have them anymore. So with this weird case of like sexual selection actually undermining natural selection. This is a picture of my dog. This is an example of artificial selection, right? Domestic animals have been bred for
You're
that.
going to say that was God's highest creation.
Oh, no, definitely not. And this is a classic example of sexual selection, right? Peacocks. You're like, oh, they're showing off how fit they are by how big their tails are. And actually, Steve was correcting me on this. He was like, no, Rachel, it's just because the birds think it's pretty. It's not always associated with fitness. And I was like, what?
Yes.
And this kind of goes into our next bird example. We're taking Steve's obsession with the theology of birds and kind of fitting it into this. This is a bower bird, and it has a sense of art. It makes art. And it's part of this courtship ritual, but it took all of these blue bottle caps and it made them, it's making art in order to help select a mate. And so humans aren't the only ones who experience an aesthetic sense, and it comes to us through animals too. And then
the universe just seems uniquely designed for aesthetics, because we see it everywhere. We see it in the natural world. We see it in birds, especially in birds, and it's rarely talked about how important aesthetics are to theology, but I think they are critical. I think they're something that we have to take account of if we want to really understand God's purposes and limits and capabilities. So.
yeah, and we also talked about how even a little bacterium creates meaning when it's going towards food, because it makes this association between light and food, because that's where the plankton live and grow, and so in its very movement, it's creating meaning at this very basic level. But at a more complex level, elephants have rituals where if they find the bones of a companion who used to be in their herd, they will pass them between each other, and it seems like they're remembering something. And I think someone was like, well, we don't want to anthropomorphize animals. Well, we also don't want to deny them the feelings that they have or seem to have, because they experience aesthetics and ritual in some levels. Some animals do.
If Thomas Nigel had asked the question, what's it like to be an elephant? It would be a very different question than what it's like to be a bat. I mean, it actually, these elephants are doing something so in excess of anything they need to do to stay alive. When they pick up the bones, they handle it in proportion to how close they were with that. So if you find your mother there on the road, you'll pick her up and pass her around for a longer time than you would, say, a third cousin. It comes back to Haldane's claim, I would gladly die for 12 cousins or 4 brothers. And, that's the timing of how these elephants are experiencing something beyond just raw natural selection. This isn't a dismissal of evolution, but it's humbling it, saying there is more to the universe than just what we see from reductive forces.
And these excesses we see in like the art, because this isn't the only reason that the birds do this is to reproduce, but like if they could find some other way to reproduce, this is not necessary for their survival, right? So these excesses of art and of ritual kind of show us that maybe these excesses are actually the point of life.
Go back to the peacock's tail for just a second. I just want to do a quick aside.
Okay.
Birds have four colors. We have 3 primary colors. Unless you're colorblind, then you have 2. We have 3. Birds have 4, which means they have millions more color shades than we have. And if you light this up, exposing that, this is a huge 3-dimensional thing. These spots become balls that dance when the tail's shaken. It's an amazing experience. I mean, talking about Mark's, the experiential world of the peacock is richer than ours in terms of what they see and what they feel and what's going on in their lives. So.
Yeah, they could be better visual artists than we are.
Yeah.
If they would set their mind to it. Okay, so transitioning between the elephants engaged in ritual, we have a ritual for an elephant. This is actually a human funeral put on for an elephant. And this leads us into the orbis tertius, relationships and love.
So let me make one comment on orbis secundus. Life entered new processes in the universe. We call these autopoietic. They're self-organizing. They reproduce. Life does things differently than anything anybody has ever seen in the history of the universe. All of a sudden, new possibilities, new processes enter the universe. This is a novelty that emerges in the universe with life. And like the bacteria showed, meaning appears with life for the first time on Earth. Meaning that light that the bacteria is swimming towards isn't just a sort of deterministic choice. It's a kind of a choice, but the light means food. It's a transfer of a different level of a movement. It's just not moving randomly. It's going directed towards the light in order to eat. So light means food. Means becomes the best way to describe that.
All right, so we have another epigraph for this one, which comes from Little Moon. She won the Tiny Desk concert last year, and we went to one of her concerts where she sang a song that she did not sing at the Tiny Desk concert thing, but we think shows sort of some of our theological conceptions about what it means to be a God. And her chorus is, I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
I asked my mother, what does it mean to be a God? She gave a pause. I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
I didn't know how to trust myself. I numbed my pain since I was 12. I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
It hurts to fail a friend in need. It hurts to see my humanity. I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
I fell from my celestial throne. Sometimes heaven feels all alone. I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
The stars shine bright above my grief. In my broken heart, I found something sweet. I think to be a God is to be always pleasantly surprised by how much more you can love.
Kiss a rose before I die, for what is love without a try? Okay, I'm trying to get you in the mood here. So, what are these theological? Right. Okay, sorry. There's another thing.
One more thing, and this is Friday about Melissa Inouye, and I feel like it's appropriate to bring her in as much as we can because of her thought. But she said, in so many ways in the 21st century life, we have isolated ourselves from our brothers and sisters, depending on our own individualistic and ideological preferences. I don't think the point of life is to have individualism and ideology. I think the point of life is to do good, to serve and to learn how it feels to love, and to be loved on a scale that is larger than yourself. I have found that many times within Latter-day Saint context, I found that within a Latter-day Saint context, and I think it's really a precious thing. So in Primus Tertius, what we see is now we've got a world, we've got the empty, raw, mechanical world of physical processes. This is where a lot of people are stuck, and this is where science is kind of stuck. Life all of a sudden brings in this newness, orbis secundus. Life immediately changes the whole universe. Just look around. I mean, the whole world. Just look around. You see it. You see it everywhere. And now in Tertius, we're talking about, so in when we begin to see things like rituals and group behavior, and we begin to see a world where we're in communications with others, and we're interacting, and we're being creative. Art doesn't envelop. If we're alone on an island, doing art gets kind of pointless. But when we're in a community, when we're in a conversation with others, suddenly art becomes an object of an opportunity for creation.
And that's another reason we chose Little Moon to sort of encapsulate this, is that it's a group of people making art together, not just one person.
I wish we could have talked her into coming and performing it. It would have made our presentation so much better.
I don't know if I could have afforded the plane ticket. Okay, so now we get to the good part that you've all been waiting for, the theological implications of love, evil, and novelty in an open universe. We actually only have 4. This is a typo, sorry. The 5th one, we're like, wait, we don't know that. The thesis one is
that didn't stop us on the other one.
But we have here the Caravaggio of Doubting Thomas touching Christ's side. And I also thought this, I want to talk about this one too. This is my friend Megan Neilbach Gaiman did this image of Steve and George, and she called it Doubting Thomas. And it's like the tree is Christ, and Steve's like trying to figure out God from nature, and that's sort of what we're doing in this whole presentation. But here's our quote about embodiment from Deidre Green's book on Jacob. The inestimable valuable, wait, let me see if I printed this out so we can, here we go. The inestimable value of each human being attested by the death of Christ includes the body and the eternal relationship between an individual and Christ that is formed through their shared embodied experiences. Also valuable is the knowledge attained through the body that cannot be gained in any other way.
And I think this is profound. This teaching implies that some truths can never be extrapolated from our embodied experience into rational thought. Rather, this knowledge is forever only available through the body.
So again, in order for God to understand everything that humans go through and also get all that knowledge, it's necessary to get a body. So our explanation for suffering is that it's just part of the universe. Just deal with it, I guess.
Get over it.
It's part of the way that natural selection works, is that things die that aren't working, or or that get attacked. And there's huge suffering. Do you want to talk about this image?
Yeah, this is ichneumoniid wasps that have laid their eggs in a caterpillar, and then their pupae emerge. Well, their larvae emerge. They pupate in cocoons like a silk moth.
Are these the cocoons or the eggs?
They're the cocoons.
And they're eating the caterpillar from the inside.
Yeah, yep.
And the caterpillar's still alive while it's being eaten.
Yep.
Yeah.
Rather
Ow.
unpleasant.
That doesn't sound good.
Darwin wrote a letter to Asia Gray, the Harvard biologist, about this, saying this is one of the reasons he could not believe in a interventionist God, that if this is the best he could do to make an uncruel universe, no thanks. And so this is the actual process.
So we're
And one of the things I think to keep in mind as we talk about this is we're thinking about creation. Henri Bergson wrote a book called Creative Evolution. Evolution is wildly creative. All the diversity we see, from giraffes to bacteria, have all partaken of this selection process, but it is immensely cruel. It's just the nature of maybe, this is a speculative potential claim, maybe this is the only way to create a universe that is open, because I am, well, we'll get to it. Go
okay.
ahead. Yeah.
One example of the cruelty of natural selection is I have a 4-year-old who's a mutant, and it's disabled her. And I wrote a poem about how much I don't like this, called Nightmare. I'm turning in a paper due today, due this morning. There are only 2 citations. There are no citations. The file I found has only 10 pages and I need 25. This must be an earlier draft. I found the right file. There are single sentence paragraphs, hallmarks of my in-process revisions. I'm willing to turn it in for failing credit. I don't know where to email it. My classmates yell the email address to me. I'm trying to do it while in a class where there are mice and it's raining. We're on benches in the attic and the teacher is upset with me. I don't need to do any of this. I graduated from junior high long ago, yet the nightmare continues. My 4-year-old is really 2, and she has been 2 for over 2 years. She can neither walk nor talk, but she can open Ziploc bags and cereal boxes and drawers. She refuses to wear pants. She screams when our dog comes close to her food perpetually. She can sign things that are important to her: milk, iPad, bread, cracker. We found the right school. It is not that she lacks education, but that learning takes years. Her 1-year-old cousin knows more words than her, but I'm not comparing. She can be her own person. I'm trying to do my homework in a home with an eternal toddler, and I'm upset with me. I cannot wake up.
So this is I get teary-eyed every time she reads that, because it's such a profound statement of our earthly condition. I don't believe that God caused that mutation. I don't believe he caused that mutation at all. I don't believe that the mutation was caused to create a trial for you or an experience for
Really?
Petra.
He wasn't like, Rachel's leaning too heavily into the arm of intellect. She needs a dumb person to show her how beautiful the world is.
Well, I can't deny that. Because if I were God, that's exactly what I would do. In fact, I do it so often. Sorry.
Okay, so
But-
you think that tragedy and suffering are something that everyone is subject to.
Right.
And God's also, he doesn't escape the suffering either.
No, he doesn't. And this is an important thing because it means that God works with what's there. It's not a theology where, and because I don't know anything about it, it's not a theology where God's sort of weaving in and out of things. I don't know exactly what God can or cannot do, but I do believe that God looks at the situation and then comes in the ways that God can. And we're very...
Yeah, what can your puny God do?
My puny God can beat up your puny God any day. No, I'm coming to the conclusion, and so this may be a more Griffin-y sort of take on this, and this is where I sort of align with process theology a little bit. I could be talked out of it. I can be talked out of anything. I get talked out of things all the time. But what I think is that God works through consciousness, okay? I'm really suspicious of natural law. The philosophy of science, in fact, has thrown out the idea of laws of nature. I mean, it's pretty much a dead concept in philosophy. We talk more about capacities and regularities and patterns that we can work with, and the idea of natural laws that exist somewhere in the universe. So there's like speed limits and stuff all over the place. But that doesn't necessarily mean that miracles are limited. I don't want to limit what can be done by God being involved in our consciousness. I think.
So you think God can only affect our consciousness, but he can make lots of things.
And other people's. And he wants allies. He wants people.
So he wouldn't control them, but he would
Talk them into it. Example.
Oh, right. He would lure them into it.
He would lure them into this. And this is one of my favorite stories. President Monson's driving to an important meeting, and I'll do this. And the impression keeps going. He was free to follow that impression. If he had not,
he would have felt really guilty.
He would have felt really guilty, and the widow, who died a few days after this, and he gave her a blessing before she went, and it was meaningful to her and to him. And hence he repeats the story. But if he had ignored it, the widow would just not have been visited. She just would have died her lonely death without the blessing.
Okay, but what about these stories? Like, my neighbor told this story.
Okay.
You know which one I'm talking
No,
about? Where she's
lay it
like,
on me.
I suddenly had this feeling, and she runs downstairs, and her 2-year-old has gone into their outside chest freezer, and if she had waited another 30 seconds, he would have suffocated or something. And as someone with scrupulosity, this freaks me out. I need to always think no, I don't believe it.
Is this an impression? Is this an impression? Is this an impression?
Right?
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the time. No, I can't go there.
It's complex, but if God can do anything, I think it's in that kind of thing, not necessarily. And so here's my answer to that.
Okay, I'm listening.
Kind of. My sense is that God would know that. He would know how to work with you. He would know how to work with your consciousness, with your OCD. He would do things that would move you.
Yeah,
in a way.
you just have to make the deal
Or
that all LDS OCD sufferers make. God will not communicate with me in this confusing way.
She's too confusing with this, so I'm just going to tell her husband to go look.
What? Excuse me? Okay, we're moving on. Okay, so even Jesus suffered, which suffering caused myself, even God, the greatest of all, to tremble because of pain. So no one escapes this. And God weeps, but we should also remember that he also laughs. Oh, yeah. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Evil exists only among agents is our third thesis. which means that stuff like my daughter having a mutation, it's not a manifestation of sin or evil. It's just sort of like we were talking about earlier. Oh, some things just happen in our lost and fallen
Right.
world. Oh wait, no, it's not fallen. That's how it was meant to be. God wanted this.
No.
Yes. There was no other way. That's what we're arguing.
Well, suffering, yes, but I don't think he wanted it. I think he recognizes its existence in the
Yeah,
universe.
well, he designed this world, so.
No.
No? Oh, right. The word
Alarms.
the word design is what Steve cannot abide.
Well, not quite, but I think evolution designs without teleological
Yeah,
direction.
it's self-designing.
And that's the beauty. That's what makes God show up and say,
Surprised by what Earth makes for him.
yeah, it gives him more opportunities to love.
Okay, so my question about the evil was, how do we, if evil only exists between agents, and there's all this suffering, how do we know that God is benevolent? Like, what if this is the worst of all possible worlds? How would it even be different?
That is a great question. the George Manley Hopkins poem, "Wert thou my enemy, O my friend, how would thou worst do one to me?" I can't
Yeah,
remember the actual
have you
poem.
ever felt that way?
Yes. Have I ever not
Okay,
felt
but
that
our
way?
conclusion
No.
was that you just have to hope that we have a good God. Sorry. The world was created for beauty, and that's what we get out of it. And then, yeah, we should start wrapping up, but we have further questions about the atonement and sin. And this is another image by Megan Gaiman, or Gielman? Gielman.
Go on, yeah.
And it's Adam and Eve. And what if we believe that God created this universe to create novelty and beauty, what does that mean for sin? Can you even have a sin?
Well, this is interesting because I've been reading Julian of Norwich,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she has this beautiful vision of Christ, and she's concerned about her sin. She's having that same experience Joseph Smith. I'm a sinner. What do I do? And Christ appears to her, and he opens up. I don't know what that means, but he opens up, and she can see inside Christ. And he goes, where do you see my concern about your sin? Point to it. Where is it? And she looks and she looks and she can't find it. And he says, it's not there. And this gives her comfort because she knows the condition of her life. There's the actual quote where she encounters Christ. And for me, I like that. I wrote a poem about it even. I'll read it just because you're a captive audience and I can. And too bad. What if when you got to heaven, God did not care if you had student loans or what projects you finished or left undone? What if God never asked you anything about anything with which you marked the years and the days or the things ticked off your lists or the goals you set and kept or did not? What if God just sat with you close and warm on Judgment Day and held your hand and brought to mind the time you captured bees in a jar and held them to your ear and the taste of cheap vanilla ice cream cone on a humid summer day after sacrament meeting and the wildness of the wind sounding scary among the branches of a maple on a cold, cloudy afternoon, and familiar pale light streaming to the earth in a soft pink glow against distant thundercaps. What if when you asked, "What about my sins?" God said, that's the poem.
So your God doesn't care about justice either?
No, he does.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And what justice is without love is what I encounter a lot of times in the dialogue, that justice is something that floats out there and makes sure everything's balanced in some weird sense. And what I think, though, that love has to be the ground of God's concern. It has to be the ground of our concern.
It's not justice versus mercy.
Right,
Oh.
right. They both They both are elements and part of the story of God's aims, his hopes for the universe. And I say, this is the funny thing, I say God's hopes. And I mean that literally, because we spend a lot of time on earth learning to have faith, hope, and charity. And if those things were not important in eternity, I can't imagine why we'd spend so much time on it. To me, those things must be elements of our future and God's future. So.
Okay. Let's see, the relational ecology.
Oh, that's King Benjamin talking to the
Yeah, I'm trying to
people.
get us to wrap up.
Oh, it won't work.
Okay. There's this great Dombrowski quote about seeing birds as similar to God. And the beauty of birdsong lies, as it apparently does for all beauty, in something unitary that exists not in spite of, but by virtue of its qualitative contrast. What does that mean? Okay, but this one was even funnier.
These are jokes. Nobody knows this, but not nobody knows
Oh,
this.
okay,
But,
yeah, explain the relationship.
But Hartshorne, process theology, one of my favorite thinkers, was a avid birder, and he wrote an entire book on birdsong and its place. And in the book, he goes through birds in Europe and America, everywhere. It's a very technical book, but in the end, he speculates. Why do birds sing? For joy. For joy. This is part of creation. This is a thing that God partakes of, we partake of, and all of creation does. Maybe even trees, who knows? At least bacteria going to the light really feel good about themselves when they.
And when he was doing this study, he looked at the monotony threshold of birds, and he found out that they do, in fact, get bored sometimes. And so that led him to wonder, does God get bored sometimes? And our idea was that this universe would be a great way for God to not be bored, because there's always something new going on based on its design.
Yeah, and in fact, Hartshorne talks about the monotony threshold of God, which is a really interesting concept. I mean, how much non-excitement, no diversity, no art, no nothing, things up in this universe a little.
Yeah, he wanted to create the opposite of a short stay in hell.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think that makes everything we wanted to talk about. I have a special request for questions. I want them to be under a minute. Like each individual question that gets asked needs to last 1 minute or less, and I'm going to time it. Does anyone want to ask a question?
I'm curious if either of you has read Sam Wilkinson's new book. Does that mean anything to you? So just to, it's hard to ask the question if you haven't read the book, but he's a BYU graduate who's a psychiatry professor at Yale now. But of all things, he wrote this book on evolutionary biology that suggests that the sort of undergirding mechanisms and the structure and results of evolution, rather than suggesting a purposeless universe, actually suggest a purposeful universe, and that evolution in effect presents us with paired opposites, like being in selfish competition against one another versus working amicably in groups to progress, and that basically the purpose of life is to choose between those paired opposites that evolution presents us with. Anyway, it intersects with what you guys are saying in really interesting ways.
To that idea, depending. I'm going to read the book now, but the reason I'd be resistant is in evolution there's a new move. You've probably heard of Dawkins' selfish gene. There's a new body of work called the genial gene that shows how cooperation emerges in the universe all over the place. And there's a woman thinker named Joan Roughgarden, and she went back to the data of hundreds and hundreds of studies on birds and looked at their conclusions about selfish genes and selfish behavior, and came to the conclusion that cooperation is filling the universe, filling the world. And so the way I think of purpose in evolution isn't necessarily as it's designed, but individuals have to have purposes to survive. It's kind of baked into both the selfish gene and the genial gene. There's this interplay that's going on between the two. And maybe that's what he meant. Maybe I don't understand him real.
So one of his examples actually is the contrast between the selfish gene, and I don't know if he uses the term the genial gene, but
Yeah.
the cooperative evolutionary path.
Right.
But his point is to say that there are multiple places where a reductionistic view of evolution, for example, suggests that it's purely selfish. It's
Right.
nature red in tooth and claw, and there's nothing else to it. And what he's suggesting is that actually the way evolution really works, to the point you're making, is much more complex.
Yes.
And that there are meaningful things to be seen in
Yeah.
that greater complexity.
And because life is filled with meaning.
Right.
That's one of the things. So yeah, thank you. I'll look at that.
Anyway, it's a great book.
Thank you.
Leaving aside theology for a moment, what are the potential implications of your presentation on Latter-day Saint culture?
It means we have a divine imperative to create art. And our church as an institution should support it. Not just like visual arts, but also like creation. And I know I was talking to Steve about this, right? Because I'm like, is this sort of self-indulgent because we're both like artists that were like, the really godlike thing to do is to write poetry. You know, like if we were athletes and we were like, no, the way to find God is to exercise every day and be strong like us, it would be like, oh, okay, good for you. But like, I like, we both really believe that being creative is part of our divine nature. And it doesn't matter if, you know, you're making something that can be shown formally or informally. Like, I just think that like we need more easy expressions of creating things. Like instead of having children just like color things in their lessons, maybe we should have them write down their own ideas or write a poem. Or like there's creativity not just in like producing art, but also like if you're a mom and you're like, okay, my child is not going to eat any of the things that I cooked and I'm going to cut it a different way. You know, it's not limited to just making things.
I super love this. And as an artist thinking of art theory, I'm curious, one, how y'all are defining beauty. And I'm thinking of it in like a post-modernism where we have like the Impressionists who are asking like, what is beauty? And then we have modernists who are asking, and postmodernists who are asking, well, if it's not about beauty, then like, what is art? And then we start thinking about what is art and like how big that can be. And so I just was curious on some of the terminology you're using and how you see your thesis factoring into contemporary questions of art making and art creation.
I love that question. Art is, in essence, what defines us as humans. 50,000 years ago, our species did something so radical and surprising that it changed everything about us. And that is the appearance of art in caves, necklaces, beads. In fact, there's a place in Spain where Neanderthals watching humans become artistic, grabbed some of that and started decorating themselves. That changed everything about us. That allowed us to speak a language of the world that's very, very different than we've seen before. And so when I look at art movements, and that's where you went, like Impressionism and modern art, and I'm working with an artist in LA named Jackie Leishman, and she does collage of just random shapes, but it speaks in a way. And so art is a complex thing. I mean, all the definitions of beauty just kind of fail. Yeah. And yet the work that goes into art, the expression, you might see it later, it might open possibilities.
I know it when I see it, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. I know it when I see it, and it may have some individual matter of taste and other things, but there is something very real and human about it. Art, I think, changed what we are as a species, as children of God, and what I hope is that God is. I want my life to be a work of God, a work of art. I want to help God in creating a universe that's better than the one I was born into. And for me, this is our role as co-creators with God, because God's going to work with what's there. And I think God is thrilled when we're creating, when we're joining, and loving. Those are the two things I see in God that I'm pretty sure I can hang on to: love and creation. Those are the two things. I don't know about punishment or judgment or any of that, but I do believe God is creative and loving. And those two together, I think, make a very powerful version, regardless of power, in a sense. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Well, this may be a follow-up question, and you can disagree with my assumption, but my assumption
Can I
is that
disagree before you?
Latter-day Saints are mostly interested in musical art and visual art, in part because they attach to doctrine and teaching so much more easily, maybe, than some forms of literary arts. And since you're both sympathetic to the visual, but you are literary artists, I'm just wondering why, this maybe connects both of these questions, why don't Latter-day Saints really care that you guys are so invested in the arts, and why do so few Latter-day Saints feel like you do that it matters?
Because they don't know God. I'm being a little facetious, but in some sense, I think it'll
Does
have.
it have to do with the fact that they can't relate to the universe? that you
Latter-day
just-
Saints
just
have not
portrayed?
always been this apathetic about literature. In fact, there used to be a literary curriculum in the Relief Society and the Mutual Improvement Associations. And, okay, wait, I could go on a whole rant about this, right? I've co-authored some publications about the literary stuff. But my most recent discovery is that they loved Adam Bede by George Eliot, and two of the authors tried to sort of imitate her style. And like, people were reading this home literature stuff. Nephi Anderson wrote Dorian, which in turn influenced the name of that biologist.
Oh, Dwayne Jeffries.
Dwayne
yeah.
Jeffries. Sometimes I say the wrong Jeffries. It's very embarrassing. It seems like it's harder to create this kind of encapsulated culture in a worldwide church. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
How about one more question? I think our time is gone.
You just sort of were talking about how it wasn't always that way. And from an outside perspective, their first thought is actually always about Mormons who write books. So I wonder what you might think of that from the inside, you might see this sort of like, who cares about the literature? But on the outside, that is actually one of the more visible things about sort of Mormon culture is like, the literature that is produced, not even just sort of like literature that is specifically about Mormonism, but like, Brandon Sanderson is an incredibly popular novelist and people know that he is Mormon.
What was the question?
What do you think about it? What do you think that we care?
Why do you think it? What does it mean that our most popular authors don't actually address Mormonism head on in their literature? I think there's a lot of fear of anti-religious sentiment. Like, I heard that even on Book Talk, people are like, I don't know if we can read Brandon Sanderson. Like, he's Mormon, and he's like, is he like Orson Scott Card? Is he anti-gay? And people are like, no, you should read some of his characters. And like, it's like this big thing where, that he could be canceled at any time. But at the same time, he does have Mormon themes in his works, and my friend Liz Busby has written on that, and it's really cool to see how this ancient text that comes from an indigenous people is like affecting how the colonizers see their religion and stuff like that.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Steve and Rachel. Now we'll have some closing remarks by Patrick.
I promise they will be mercifully brief. So first of all, I think it is essential that we offer thanks to Deidre Green for all of her. And this small army of helpers who have been doing all kinds of things behind the scenes. I really admire what Deidre is doing and trying to create here at GTU with the kind of instantiation of Mormon studies here in a different mode than we've seen in some of the other Mormon studies programs elsewhere, and I'll get back to that a little bit. Tyler mentioned earlier today about feeling like he was an amateur. He was an oncologist among people who do less useful things with their lives, and that was a direct quote, right? I always go back a few years ago. I spent a couple weeks participating in the Mormon Theology Seminar. Now it's the Latter-day Saint Theology Seminar that Adam Miller and Joe Spencer and Rosalind Welch and other people have created and fostered over several years. And it was a small group. If you don't know much about it, people gather together for 2 weeks and do an intensive study and reading of one chapter of Scripture. Or if the chapter is too long, they don't even get to the whole chapter because that's too much to ask for in 2 weeks to read an entire chapter of Scripture. It's 4 verses a day. And I came in a little bit suspicious, but actually came out thoroughly converted. By the process, by the conversations, by everything that was a reputation. It became clear that I should not take up poker as a profession, because there would be times that Adam or one of the others would go on to one of their flights of fancy, and my face clearly said, "Bring it back down to earth, my friends." So in some ways, I sometimes feel like an interloper in conversations like this, but for the most part, I'm actually completely energized and thrilled by what's happening and what has happened the last couple of days and what has happened the last couple of decades. As you think about what's happened the last couple of days, we had a brilliant theme, I think, that Deidre brought to us that generated a lot of terrific thinking in lots of different modes and from lots of different methods. We heard history and comparative religion and literary analysis and philosophy of religion, philosophical theology, ethical theology, feminist theology, queer theology, biological theology or jazz theology or whatever we just heard, and a healthy dose of pastoral theology along the way. We heard from confessionally LDS voices, academically neutral voices, professedly non-LDS voices, and they all blended together, I think, in really a terrific blend. One of my good friends, Chris Thomas, when he talks about the Bible, he says it's not just a library. He says actually a better analogy for what the Bible is. He says it's like a black gospel choir. And it's all these voices who come together. And yes, sometimes they sing in beautiful harmony, but he said actually what makes the choir so interesting, what makes a black gospel choir so good, it's the dissonances, it's the blues notes, all right? It's Paul and James wrestling with each other. It's all these different things. And sometimes a certain voice steps out and sings in solos for a little while and then comes back and blends into the choir. And he says that's what the Bible is. In a lot of ways, I think that's what we saw these last couple days. And so I see the kind of methodological and modal diversity that we've heard the last couple of days as a feature, not a bug. I think it's essential for these ideas and these conversations to cross-fertilize with one another. There is a time, and it's important to have spaces for hyper-specialization. That's oftentimes how knowledge is advanced. But I think it's also important for us to talk to each other in the different modes that we do. I've also been thinking a lot the last couple days about a conference that was very formative for me when I was in graduate student as a student of history, studying American religious history, and sort of just as I was getting into what we now call Mormon studies. And this was a conference that was held at the Library of Congress in 2005 to celebrate the bicentennial of the birth of Joseph Smith. In a lot of ways, it was a very significant event. I mean, obviously, the venue was significant. To do that at the Library of Congress was no small feat. There were a lot of interesting papers that were given. But sometimes, oftentimes, the event is remembered as a little bit of an embarrassment. And I'll tell you why. So I think there was a sense of kind of positive, I mean, just giddiness that here we were as Mormons, that we'd been invited into the club, to the Library of Congress to talk about Joseph Smith. And it was interesting to see what happened. Over those, I think it was also a 2-day conference, there were a wide variety of papers that were given. And I remember I went as a graduate student from Notre Dame, and a handful of us who were Latter-day Saints who were studying various things at Notre Dame, we road tripped there. And I remember sitting kind of on the back row, feeling like that was the appropriate place for graduate students in that venue, sitting on the back row, and sometimes sitting up kind of straight in my chair and thinking like, wow, like, isn't this amazing what's going on? And at times, like, shrinking in my chair and saying, I hope nobody sees that I'm here. I remember, in particular, a presentation by a professor from BYU in which he showed a series of PowerPoint slides in which he showed, as my memory serves, he showed a series of green lights for every positive evidence of the historicity of the Book of Mormon, and then red lights for any problems that there might be with historicity. And it turned out at the end there were more green lights than red lights, and therefore the Book of Mormon was true. Thoroughly impressed with all of this. Douglas Davies, the great scholar of religion, who's written extensively about Mormonism, he got up and he asked, he says, is this an academic or an evangelistic conference? Because it wasn't always sure which it was. And so as I think about what's happened the last couple days, I think we're a long ways from Davies' question in 2005. And what the last 2 days have revealed to me, at least a couple of things. So first of all, I think Latter-day Saints in this century have become increasingly confident in the strength of their own position. Not just in a kind of doctrinal or sectarian sense. Mormons have never been overly humble about the strength of our position from a sectarian sense, but in an intellectual sense. And I think this is the result of multiple generations now of Latter-day Saints who have received academic training, advanced academic training, put in hard work, sometimes done it on their own. I mean, think about autodidacts like B.H. Roberts. So sometimes it's as a result of a PhD program, sometimes not. But people who have put in the hard work over many, many years, while also being solidly rooted in and curious about their own tradition. I think we're seeing the fruits of now many generations of serious intellectual labor. Second of all, it seems to me that Mormonism may be weird, but weird is cool now. When it comes to contemporary Christianities, let alone contemporary religious formation and spiritualities, in 21st century America, there is no narrative, there is no center anymore. It used to be that Mormonism was on the outside looking in, wanting to be in on the club. I'm not sure that there is a club anymore. If Mormonism is on the margins, so is everything else. Try talking to a Catholic these days. Try talking to just about anybody. Everybody feels like they're on the margins. That's not to deny real and significant imbalances of various different kinds, only to say that it's not entirely clear to me that the longtime gatekeepers anymore have any particular privilege of place. Perhaps the opposite, that maybe in the 21st century, all the real action seems to be happening outside the gates. So I've said it before, and I mean it, that when it comes to Mormon intellectual life, whereas the 20th century was very much the century of Mormon history, and it's phenomenal what Mormon historians did in the second half of the 20th century. I think provided the foundation for much of what happens in Mormon intellectual life more broadly. But I'm convinced that the 21st century will be and is the century of Mormon theology and philosophy. And I'm even more confident of that after this weekend. And so I want to finish by saying something decidedly unsexy, which is to argue for the importance of institutions. That's a very un-21st century thing to do. But Mormon history succeeded in and since the 1960s largely because of the creation of organizations and institutions. Of a flagship organization, the Mormon History Association, with its flagship journal, the Journal of Mormon History, with other journals like Dialogue and Sunstone and BYU Studies. These things became anchors. They became facts on the ground. They became a venue where ideas could be vetted, where ideas could be circulated. And then they created very real communities of people that were sustained over time, over years, over decades. They became multi-generational. They became places of mentorship, where now then you do have a multi-generational Mormon intellectual life. And that was due to the creation of institutions and organizations that fostered that. And I think this is why GTU matters. I think this is why this place matters. I think it's why Claremont matters. It's why the Arrington Chair, which I hold, matters. It's why all of these different things matter. It's because these become a kind of anchors. It's not all that sexy sometimes to do this kind of institution building, right? But it does matter for the perpetuation and the growth and the maintenance of intellectual life. And so I couldn't be more thrilled at what has happened the last couple days, both the content and the form. The fact that we're here, the fact of the kinds of conversations that we've had with the kind of generosity, the kind of creativity. I expected that we would come in and solve the problem of evil. It has been solved in lots of different ways, none of them satisfactory, and that's brilliant, right? But here we are doing it together. This is exactly the kind of intellectual community that I think we need to create, we must create. It's important to create as we move forward. So thanks to Deidre, thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for a terrific conference.